I would also like to welcome you to Christ Community Church. It's so good to see each of you here today. I want to welcome those of you who are in the room and those also who are, we hope, joining us by the internet. We had a power failure yesterday and trying to bring equipment up, and they were telling me that our internet is slow as molasses. So today, I'm not sure you're out there or not, but I'm hoping that you are. Maybe we ought to send, I don't know, little signals or something to see if they're there. We have a number of things that are going on in the next coming weeks. One of the most important is that we have a lunch today for those who are new to the church. This is an opportunity for you to get to know us and us to get to know you, to talk a little bit and to talk about the mission, purpose, answer any questions that you may have about the church. We've been talking about this for a number of weeks. If you did not register, we still have food, all right? So if you would like to be a part but weren't planning to, you can change your plans right now. And it's lasagna. And I saw a really good cake coming in too. So you might want to think about it. It's going to be good. And speaking of good food, let me tell you that in a couple of weeks, we have an ice cream social coming up. And right before that ice cream social was a Singspiration. See what I did there? We hope that you'll come and participate in that on a Wednesday night. In a couple of weeks, you can see the date and the time there in your bulletin. And that will be the kickoff for some of our fall groups. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks. We always end our services with communion. And sometimes often I don't think to say it and go for fairly long periods of time. But in this church, we believe that the table of Christ ought to be open to all believers. So if you are a Christian, no matter where you're a member, no matter what church you're a member of, we invite you to participate in communion at the end of the service. And as we end the service today, we also will have some prayer team members that will be here in the front, and we'll be glad to pray with you about anything. Because of the online stuff, and we kind of went to this during COVID, we kind of end our service and turn off the cameras and do all that kind of stuff. And and people are leaving. If you would like to stay and pray, you can do that as long as you like. There would be no disturbance and nothing to limit that at all. So we do that every Sunday. And again, that's one of those things that every week we have an evaluation, and it's what did we leave out? And that's always my bad. I always forget to say that. But we have prayer team members that would be glad to pray with you at the end of the service today. We're going to begin with a short film clip, and go ahead and play that now.
Sometimes I guess there just aren't enough rocks.
Sometimes there just aren't enough rocks. I'm the oldest in my family. There are 4 of us kids. I'm the oldest. I have a baby sister. My baby sister sometimes watches our services, frequently watches our services. So sis, if you're out there, hello. Hope your birthday was happy this week. We have between my sister and I 2 brothers. Growing up, they were very close. The older of the 2 is 3 years younger than me, and then the one after him is just a year younger. They literally roomed together from the day Perry came home from the hospital. They did that all the time we were growing up. And then Paul went to college for a year. Perry soon followed him. And they roomed together through college. They were college roommates as well. They roomed together a little while after that too. And then finally they began to go their separate ways. The older of the two got married and moved away and was gone for a while. The younger also married. The older of the two got a divorce. In the divorce, he lost everything. My youngest brother took him into his home. By then, my youngest brother had a fairly sizable house, and he had extra space, even though he had a family. And the older of the two he called himself one time the crazy uncle in the basement. He became the crazy uncle in the basement. At some point along the line, he began to have an affair with his brother's wife. There are supposed to be 7 billion people on the planet. That's about 3.5 billion women. Of all those 3.5 billion women, how many would actually cause a dividing of our family? Not many. I'm not approving of affairs in any way, but what I'm saying is, for one brother to have an affair with his brother's wife is divisive in a way that you cannot imagine. Talk about throwing a kink in Thanksgiving dinner. I wasn't directly wronged in that, yet I was angry because, well, I find it very embarrassing. They weren't private about it. They began to make posts on social media online and continue to do that to this day. So this has been an ongoing thing across these years. It's embarrassing, and just by the way I'm wired, for me, loyalty, it took me a while to realize that I care about loyalty more than most people. The way I'm wired, I will go to the mat for somebody. And for this kind of betrayal, it's been a hard thing for me to deal with. My dad was angry, at least as angry as I've been. He couldn't imagine that one of his sons would do such a thing. I wish all this were over. I wish that it was something that was in the past. It's been quite a number of years that they've been in this situation, but there are those continuing social media posts. I get asked about them. I was in Denver a few weeks ago and got asked at least once about some of this, so this just doesn't go away. I resent the way that it has complicated family gatherings now for over a decade. I look at the pictures. One of my favorite features on the iPhone is when it shows you like a picture of the day with the widget I have the widget, and I always enjoy seeing the different pictures. I see pictures of going to visit family, and you can see it in who's present and who's not present. Every single picture ever since all this happened. This complicated care for my parents during their final years as they were dying, it was on my dad's mind as he was approaching death. It made even for some kind of uncomfortable moments at their funerals. And it still goes on. It's something I pray about daily. My brother that had the affair and has been involved in all this, he is at the very top of my 360 Revolution prayer list. We talk about our 360 Revolution prayer list to pray for at least 3 people 6 days a week, miss 0 opportunities to share the gospel with them. And he is number 1 on my list. And I can tell you, sometimes there aren't enough rocks. Anger isn't a fun emotion, but it sure is powerful. When you look at the characters in the Bible whose lives were impacted by anger, Jacob stands out in a class by himself. Jacob had a talent for making the people around him angry. You find it in the Bible if you start reading in Genesis chapter 27 and read the next through chapter 37. You see that this happened over and over again. It begins in chapter 27 when we have this thing between Jacob and Esau. Esau was his brother. He was actually the older. Jacob stole his brother's blessing. The blessing was kind of a spoken prophecy, and with him and his mother, they deceitfully kind of set up the situation so that they stole Esau's blessing. This made Esau extremely angry, so much so we read this beginning in verse 41. Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And he said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near. In other words, my dad is about to die. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. When Rebekah, she's the mother that had sided with Jacob, when Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for her son Jacob. And she said to him, your brother Esau is consoling himself with the thought of killing you. Remember that line. I think that's a very powerful line. I actually did some work in Hebrew this week on that line, looking it up. I'm thinking, is it actually that strong, or in these modern translations, did they kind of juice it up just a little bit? No, it's actually that strong. The word there means he was comforting himself, consoling himself, plotting in his mind how to kill his brother the moment dad is dead. Rebekah goes on, now then, my son, do as I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. Consoling himself with the thought of killing his brother. Well, in Genesis 33, skipping ahead a bit, Jacob has been living in Haran a number of years, and we now see that Laban has become angry with Jacob. Like I said, this guy has a talent for making people around him angry. He has married two of Laban's daughters. He only intended to marry one, and it was a package deal. He got a special he couldn't pass up, I guess. So the situation, and I knew this, but this week as I was working through this passage, I'm thinking, what this means is that Jacob's uncle, Laban, his mother's brother, was his uncle and his double father-in-law. And furthermore, when you read the story, you find out that Laban is also a trickster, as is Jacob. So apparently Jacob took after his uncle a whole lot. They resembled one another. But now Laban is also mad at Jacob. And I would just remind you, this story is nearly 4,000 years old. This is at a time when human DNA hadn't decayed to the point that it has today. So being that close of a relative was less of a problem back then. It still is icky. But what happens is that Jacob makes Laban so angry that Jacob decides he'll take his chances with his brother Esau. So he leaves Haran to go back to home. He's been missing his mother all these years. They've been apart. There are no cell phones, not even text messaging, so he's had nothing all these years. And so he goes back home, and he's trying to figure out what's he going to do as he meets Esau. He is really between a rock and a hard place. Esau on one side and Laban on the other. And he tries to bribe his brother to give him all these things, but his brother Esau has become quite wealthy on his own. His brother Esau comes and greets him, and they begin to talk a bit, and then Esau leaves, and Jacob says he will follow him, but ever the liar and trickster, Jacob goes a different place and settles in a different neighborhood. He's close, but he's not too close to his brother because he doesn't trust his brother. But you see that this troubled relationship continues to exist. It's never healed. It extends their entire lives. And it extends to this very day. The Arabs of today they claim descent from Esau and Ishmael. You may think just Ishmael, but also from Esau. Esau fathered a tribe called the Edomites. The Edomites became some of the arch enemies of the Israelites several hundred years later. And so this disagreement between brothers, this anger between brothers continues to reverberate down through the centuries to this very day. When you read the news and you read about what's happening in Gaza and Israel this week, this is an outcome of this story in the Bible of the disagreement and the anger. Well, in chapter 34, there arises a situation with Jacob's daughter, and she's mistreated, and the sons react in a certain way, and in the end, Jacob's neighbors hate him because of what happens around the daughter. That's in chapter 34. The anger finally impacts Jacob's relationship with his own sons. As a young man, Jacob was this conniver and deceiver, and in his old age, he becomes the one who is deceived. Jacob had 12 sons. Of those 12, Joseph was his favorite. And we read this in chapter 37. It says, "Now Jacob loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him." Who is making this bad family situation between brothers? It's Jacob. It's the dad. It's his favoritism. Not only does he have a favorite son, he displays it and gives visual image to it through this stupid coat. The kids love to color in Sunday school. In Genesis 37, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers who are tending sheep some distance away. The brothers see him coming at a distance. And remember, Esau was consoling himself with how to plot the murder of his brother. Now these 10 brothers see Jacob at a distance, and they begin to talk about, what if we just killed him? What if we did this? What if we did that? We're a long ways from home. They're kind of consoling themselves and their own hurt with what they could do to Joseph. And the problem is, maybe in your mind, maybe you will think about stuff and not do it. Maybe you will console yourself by thinking about doing some evil thing and not actually do it. But when you get to talking with a group of other people, you egg each other on and you end up supporting each other so that bad stuff happens more often. And that's what happens in this case. They see Joseph coming from a distance and they decide when he gets close, we're going to kill him. And Reuben, one of the brothers, says, finally, let's not kill him. If we do, we'll have his blood on our hands. Let's just leave him in this empty well here in the desert. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. Brother's still dead and you still did it, but somehow you didn't actually kill him, so it's better. So they have him in the well, and then they see this caravan of traders on their way to Egypt, and they decide that rather than leaving him there to die, they're going to sell him off, and he'll be in slavery in Egypt, out of their lives forever. And then what do? So they get this plan to take that hated coat, which is the object. It symbolizes everything they hate. And they dip it in goat's blood. No DNA test back then. And they take it back to their father, and they show it to him, and they say, and this is so callous, they say, look what we found. Does this robe belong to your son? Could this possibly be the robe? And Jacob says, yes, it is my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him. It's amazing. It's interesting to me that they do these suggestive things, and then Jacob builds the story in his own mind. They don't tell the dad what happened. They just let him create this mental story. This is dastardly. It says, then Jacob tore his clothes and he dressed himself in burlap, and he mourned deeply for his son for a long time. His family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. I will go down to my grave mourning for my son, he would say, and then he would weep And this continued for years and years and years. And every time the dad is in there weeping and grieving for his son, his other sons have this guilty feeling because they know the truth and they can't tell it. They acted out of anger. They acted in the heat of the moment. They committed an act that they would come to regret. But they had to live with this guilt year after year after year. They couldn't undo it. Seneca, the Greek philosopher, said many centuries ago, anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything on which it is poured. So what do we do with anger? Are you angry? You got some? You got a crazy uncle in the basement somewhere? I want to share with you the ABCs of anger management. And I have to tell you that if as much as any message I've ever shared with you, I've basic, seems in some ways even stupid. But it's amazing how often we deny our anger. I did an internship at a hospital as a chaplain, hospital chaplaincy. One of the very first things that they taught us is when you walk into a room, you notice, you use your eyes, you see what's going on. As you have conversations, you begin to watch to see if the body language matches what's being said. For example, somebody, how are you doing? And somebody sitting in their chair with their fists like this, doing fine. Well, there's kind of a disagreement there, isn't there? But we do that all the time. We say things, we manufacture things, we put on a good face. What I'm saying is if you're angry, acknowledge that, at least to yourself, acknowledge it. Don't deny it, don't discount it, don't shrug it off, don't push it down. Don't get bent out of shape thinking what a horrible person you are because you're angry. Don't say, I must be a terrible Christian because I felt anger. Simply admit it. I am angry. Anger is a red flag. It ought to be like that red light on our dashboards in our car that gets our attention. Maybe not just a light, but a dinging that goes with it. We ought to say, what does this mean? What is the red flag? What is going on here? Let's see how anger is treated in the Bible for just a moment. It's not exhaustive, just a few verses. Jesus actually raises the bar in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, if you're angry with someone, you're subject to judgment. Now, we're going to explore that a little more as we go on. He doesn't say you're going to be judged because you're angry. He's saying you're subject to judgment because something else is going on. What is that something that's going on? More often, the Bible warns us about the danger of anger, what people do when they let their anger get out of control. For example, in Ephesians 4, Paul says, don't sin by letting anger gain control over you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, for anger gives a mighty foothold to the devil. The devil will use any material that he possibly can against us. He will use that against you and against me if we don't prevent him from doing that. In Proverbs 4, we read, those who control their anger have great understanding. Those with a hasty temper will make mistakes. And probably road rage videos on YouTube. In Proverbs 19, it says, people with good sense restrain their anger. They earn esteem by overlooking wrongs. I work with a senior pastor in Charleston, West Virginia, and he would say when somebody says something that could be taken in one of two ways, always choose to take it the best way possible. Make a choice. Choose to take it the best way possible. Of the 7 deadly sins we've been looking at, this is the only one ever displayed by God. We see on a number of occasions that God gets angry. So what's going on with that, especially in that line about being subject to judgment? Anger is an emotional reaction. It should be an alarm. It's not necessarily bad that we are angry when it motivates us to do right things. I've been working slowly through this book about the Nazis in Germany and what they did. It would have helped had the German people themselves become angry about what they were seeing, but that did not happen. Edmund Burke once said, "All that is necessary for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing." So when we see things that are against God's will, that are harming other people, there should be some anger there, and it should motivate us to do the right thing. It's what we do with the anger that really causes us to be subject to judgment or not. But anger is like a trigger on a gun. When we feel it rising, we better take note. We'd better acknowledge it. We better try to figure out what's about to come out of the barrel of our gun when the trigger gets pulled. Step number 1 is to acknowledge the anger, to recognize it. Step number 2, and this is so important, backtrack to the source. Backtrack, don't rehearse. There's an important difference. We sometimes replay situations over and over again in our minds. The Bible says that Esau was consoling himself by thinking about how to kill his brother. Now, I'm not going to ask you if you've been consoling yourself thinking about how to kill somebody else, but have you ever replayed a situation in your mind over and over and over again? What we need to do is to backtrack. We see that flashing red light. I'm angry. Vulnerable. We don't like to feel that way, so very quickly we go from feeling hurt and vulnerable to being angry. We get a shot of adrenaline. We begin to react strongly. We're no longer a victim, but somebody who's in control, at least so we think. Let me give you an example. Now, this example is a generic example that comes originally from a counseling book, but it's a good one. Imagine that a wife is mad because her husband is coming home for dinner late, once again, 4th time that week. Her opening line is, "Why don't you put a cot in your office?" Her second line is, "Don't expect turn-down service and a mint at this hotel." Other comments follow. What's going on here? Well, she's angry. Good job, Sherlock. But let's backtrack. What's actually going on? Anger is a masking emotion. What is she actually feeling? What was she feeling before she got angry? Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it's insecurity in the marriage, wondering where her husband has been late several consecutive nights. Maybe she felt like she didn't matter very much to her husband. Perhaps she had a need for attention, security, and companionship that was violated. Perhaps she just felt devalued by her husband. He didn't show up at the appointed time. What probably happened was, as she was looking at the clock, she probably first felt sad, and then perhaps unloved and untreasured and devalued and abandoned. Because these emotions all hurt and you don't like feeling them for long, it's not hard to move over to anger. That's how this process works. Once we begin to feel angry, we can take all of these hurt feelings and focus on that dirty, rotten person that made us feel bad. We can mask our pain. We can begin to feel more powerful. We spew all of this out, these painful feelings out on the other person in the form of rage. In the story of Joseph that we just looked at, why were the 10 older brothers so angry? I mean, what had Joseph actually done? Joseph had worn a coat and he'd been obnoxious. When you read the story, he wore a coat, he didn't have the sense not to brag about it. He was obnoxious. What was really going on? Each of these brothers felt that they weren't worth anything in Dad's eyes. And I can tell you that what a son wants is his father's blessing. And they didn't get it. Joseph was getting all the attention. He was getting all the accolades. It didn't matter how hard they were out in the fields working. Joseph got it all. In fact, he didn't even have to go out in the fields working. He got to stay home in the kitchen with Mama. That's why he was there to send out in the first place. Do you see how this works? They're hurt. They don't like being hurt. So they become angry. They're angry in a group. Now they're considering what to do together. The problem is when deeply hurt and disappointed people move over to anger, trouble is just around the corner. It becomes like toxic waste. The longer you keep it inside of you, the more that it will poison you. And a person that's angry, that's feeling this, they will say and do terrible things. That's why Jesus said, if you're angry with someone, you're subject to judgment. It's not the feeling he's talking about, it's what you do. Next. The ABCs of anger management. Step 1 is to acknowledge the anger. Number 2, to backtrack so as to discover the underlying hurts and needs that were violated. Try to look for the original emotion you were feeling before you got angry. And sometimes some of us are quick on the trigger, so quick we don't even realize we felt a feeling before anger. Number 3, consider your options. What are you going to do with it? You can express it. For a little while, we had this, and it was one of the schools of psychology. Let it fly, vent, don't repress. Repressing is bad, so therefore vent it. And what we learned is that was very destructive. It didn't work at all. Number 2, you can redirect it. So the boss yells at dad, dad yells at his wife, the wife yells at her son, the son kicks the cat scratches the baby. Why did the baby get scratched by the cat? Because boss yelled at dad. Have you ever been the subject of redirected anger? Somebody comes unglued at you, and you realize it's not actually yours, what you did. You were just the one that was safer than the person they were actually angry at. We find that in the Bible. Cain's offering was not accepted by God. Cain was mad at God. What do you do when you're mad at God? I mean, he's all powerful. You got nothing. So Cain kills Abel. What was Abel doing? He was minding his own business. It's redirected anger. You can repress it. Deny it till you die. Christians often do this. We want to look good, so we shove it down. Sometimes we are afraid of acknowledging it, what we would say and do, so we just shove it down. But it seeps out in so many ways. It's like setting a wastebasket on fire and then instead of putting it out, just putting it in the closet and shutting the door. It may burn down the house. A few years ago, there were a group of people. This is in the period of time after the fall of the Soviet Union and before the rise of Putin. There were about 10 minutes in there when, there were possibilities for Russia. It was during that 10-minute period of time that they were searching some of the forests in western Russia looking for the bodies of those that had died in World War II. This is now 60 years after the war is over. So they're doing this search trying to find these bodies, and in the process, there was a bomb that was there that was unexploded, and in there messing with the dirt, it exploded. It killed 2 people outright and injured 4 more. That war had been over for 60 years, and yet there were 6 more casualties on that day. The longer landmines, I'm told, stay in the ground, the more unstable they become. And some of us have all kinds of landmines in our souls. Well, you can express it, redirect it, repress it, or you can confess it. I hope this is the one that you will choose. Jesus said this is how I want you to conduct yourself in these matters. When you enter your place of worship and are about to make an offering, and you suddenly remember a grudge a friend has against you, abandon your offering, leave immediately, go to this friend and make things right. Then and only then come back and work things out with God. In Ephesians 4, Paul writes, don't sin by letting anger gain control of you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, for anger gives a mighty foothold to the devil. Our last choice is to confess it. Confess it, deal with it, resolve it. For some deep-seated anger, like that expressed by Jenny in the clip, it may take some professional help. It may take a professional counselor. Maybe a while since you've seen that movie, but in the movie we discover through that scene that a lot of what's been in Jenny's life has been caused because of what happened as a child in that house. That it's been coming out in her life ever since. Sometimes we need a good counselor to work through some of these things. So, I started out by telling you my family situation, which is ongoing. So how have we been dealing with it over these intervening years? Prayer. Lots and lots and lots of prayer. This is something I pray about every single day. Another thing is Timothy, Paul writes in his first letter to Timothy, he says, keep a close watch on yourself. Not only have I done that, but my other siblings and my parents also did that as well. We have been very careful all these years to watch our words. So far as I know, none of us have ever crossed the line in what we've said. I don't think any of us have. The rest of us are Christians, and we all pray about this. Keep a close watch on yourself. There is an element of long-term victimization. I wish I could say that all this was in the past. This is something that happened years ago, and we just move on and everything be hunky-dory. I know that that's actually what my younger brother wishes we could do. But it does bring us to a question. I've asked this question. My dad was asking this question. We talked about it. My sister also. And the question is, what does redemption look like in this situation? What does redemption look like? How can God's grace come into a situation like this and redeem it to any extent at all? And I can tell you that one of our prayers has been, God, please help us not to act in such a way that keeps you from being able to do what you want to in the life of my other brother in this situation. We have even talked about that. Both my parents have passed, and now that I'm the executor of the estate, all of that is now going on. And the three of us came together and said, in dealing with this, we don't want this situation to be used as something the devil can use against coming to Christ. So how do we even deal with this in a way that won't prevent redemption? For all of us, we don't want the devil to gain a foothold in our own souls. And the truth is, we've all run out of rocks years ago, but we've not exhausted God's grace. I was trying to think, has there been anything positive that's come out of this? Well, I, at one time, carried a good bit of anger within me about a lot of things. It's caused me to have to look at that. What are those sources? Why was I angry? What were the needs that were not met? What did I need to deal with in my own stuff? And I have to tell you, that I think at this place in life, I'm more at peace than I've ever been. Whether any movement ever takes place or not. So God can be redemptive, even in the middle of some of the horrible things that happen in our lives. Every week, I believe that God gives us a message and that there should be steps we take in response to the message that God gives us. I don't think he just brings us together to entertain us. I think he wants us to take certain steps. And so on your connection card, there's a step there that says, my next step today is to pray and to ask God to help me to control my anger in the area of what? Are you carrying anger? If so, what is the source of that anger? Would you acknowledge it and then backtrack and begin to try to figure out what needs were unmet, and then how you can allow God to come into that so as to resolve it in your life? Let me share with you a word of prayer. Lord, I watched that movie, Forrest Gump, and so much of it is kind of funny. How Forrest seems to just bounce through life and always good things happen to him no matter what. And we laugh at the way that he says things. And yet, Lord, there's this scene right in the middle. Not enough rocks. Lord, some of us, I think, feel that way. Some of us have been deeply wounded by different things that have happened in life. And sometimes those things that have wronged us, we've tried to repress it and just to go on. And the truth is, it keeps coming out. And we can look at our lives and some of the difficulties that we have, and we can trace back to a source of some of these unresolved things in our souls. I pray, Father, that your Spirit would speak to us, and perhaps we could have some clarity this morning in a way that we haven't. And I pray, Father, that you would reveal some of those things to us, and that we would be able to acknowledge them, that we would be able to figure out exactly what's going on inside of us. And Lord, I pray that we'd be able to confess it and lay it before you and look to you to be able to deal with us redemptively as we then seek to deal with others redemptively. Lord, I thank you that you are a good and gracious God, that we may run out of rocks, but you never run out of grace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.